This is Overwatch, a multiplayer first-person shooter by Blizzard Entertainment set in a post-war future. Players form teams of 6, with each player on the team being able to pick one of a large roster of heroes, including healers, tanks, and defenders. Games are quick, often 5 to 20 minutes long, and the action is fast-paced and furious. This is me, East Asian StarCraft nerd gamer girl extraordinaire and no wait, that's Diva. This is me, Chinese-Canadian social work student and activist. I'm also a queer disabled gamer girl extraordinaire, an avid StarCraft player and Diva main. I love Overwatch because of characters like Diva, because she's so much like me and it's fun to play as somebody like yourself, especially if you normally don't see yourself represented in games. And she's not alone in terms of the game's diversity of characters. Over half of Overwatch's heroes are women, a lot are people of color, and many are disabled. Disabled people in particular are not often well represented in video games, and it is neat to see a game with so many disabled heroes. But just how accepting and welcoming of disability is Overwatch? That is the issue I want to explore, specifically through the lens of universal design. Is Overwatch's design, as a setting and as a game, one that welcomes disabled people and centers them? From my experience, I argue that while Overwatch has a substantial amount of disability representation amongst its characters and setting, it is lacking when it comes to creating a game environment designed with disability in mind. Welcome to Amy vs. Overwatch, Disability Disjunction. So what is universal design? As explained by Amy Hamre, the ideological origins of universal design came from 1960s and 70s disability activist philosophies, which imagined the future centered on the needs and expertise of disabled people, rather than compulsory rehabilitation and normalization. It was about reflecting an ideal societal ethos, where disability is seen as a resource to be preserved, rather than eliminated. That's the definition I will be using. In terms of preserving disability, Overwatch can be seen as somewhat reflecting universal design philosophies, as it presents a future where there are people with different bodies and disabilities, all of whom are powerful and have a place in society. Even the design of stages suggests that the future may be more inclusive, as there are lifts and hover elevators. As well, representation of disability varies. Michael Berube identifies 11 categories of disability representation in fiction. Various characters in Overwatch could be argued to reflect one or multiple of these types, but importantly, many characters' disabilities reflect disability as itself, rather than representing a thematic trait. For example, multiple characters have prostheses, such as McCree's prosthetic arms, Sombra's spine, and Genji's cybernetic implants, which saved him from near death. Of those 3, only Genji's prostheses are used to represent something, in this case teaching him the value of life and giving him a journey of self-discovery. Along with disability as granting superhuman strength, Genji's representation could also be seen as disability as tragic insight. However, neither McCree nor Sombra's prostheses are pointed out as a plot point in the game. They are simply there. As well, not every disabled character uses prostheses. Anna chooses not to get her eye replaced after losing in battle, and even has a voice line where she declines an offer to repair it.
No, Anna. There are procedures we could look into to repair your eye.
You're very kind, but I'm comfortable with who I am now.
This shows that even though the future offers many opportunities to repair disabilities, there are still people who choose not to get them fixed, and this appears to be an accepted choice. Symmetra is an especially interesting example, as she has both a prosthetic arm and identifies on the autistic spectrum. While the tie-in Overwatch comic states that Symmetra being autistic allows her to see the world in ways others don't, which could be interpreted as depicting autism as granting some sort of special abilities, it is also not a negative depiction, and shows not just that autism still exists in the future, but that there is a place in the world for people on the spectrum, and that their differences have worth in society. This would go to the idea of the disability as a resource to be preserved and not eliminated. Also, in the game, neither her arm nor her being on the spectrum is mentioned, although it presumably still factors into her characterization, which could be seen as another example of portraying disability as itself. These are just a few examples of the kinds of disabled representation in the game. On the meta level, due to all of the disabled characters, Overwatch can also be seen as reflecting universal design philosophies by being attractive to disabled players and drawing them to the game. This could be seen as creating an environment which celebrates and encourages disability. However, does the game design itself reflect universal design principles? That's another story. Returning to Michael Berube's analysis of disability representation, he notes that representation speaks to both political and aesthetic concerns. Simply representing marginalized identities in the game's characters does not necessarily reflect on those identities being represented politically if the game itself is not designed for those identities. On one hand, a game where players can help the team without having to shoot things means that those who are not good at aiming or steadying their hands can still participate. As well, the quick matches means that disabled players who do not have the energy or attention span for long periods of play can still find enjoyment. However, these features are not because Overwatch has disabled players in mind, but because it wants to appeal to a wide variety of people to sell as many games as possible. As Amy Hamray notes, designs aimed at a wide variety of people that did not specifically consider the differences and marginalizations between populations do not reflect the disability-centering discourses behind the original concept of universal design. While Overwatch may have some design aspects that lend itself to some forms of disability access, these are incidental, and we can see this in how inaccessible the game is in many other ways. As a fast-paced game where a lot happens, players in Overwatch must react quickly and constantly. Players prone to stimulus overload might have trouble processing the game.
4-1.
Further, the pace of the game also puts a lot of strain on your hands. Here, I've captured my hands while playing Overwatch. You can see how quickly my fingers must move. When playing characters where I have to constantly reload, my hands often cramp up. Players with impairments in their hands or who do not have two hands would be even more disadvantaged, even if they were able to afford alternative controllers, as the game is designed for a mouse and keyboard. Similarly, you must be able to see to play Overwatch and be able to distinguish colors, as your allies are highlighted in blue and your enemies in red. This means that colorblind players have a lot of trouble playing the game. This is an issue that Blizzard has attempted to address by including free colorblind filters. Here I play the game with each of them to show you the differences. While these filters may help, there are limitations. Many of the smaller effects in the game are impossible to tell apart even with the filters. For example, friend and foe hacked health packs are distinguished only by different colored skulls, and these look very similar in each filter. But worse than the lack of accessibility for people with visual impairments is the lack of accessibility for people with hearing impairments. Overwatch is an incredibly sound-reliant game.
I'm taking care.
Every character says different things in different situations, and say specific phrases when they use their powerful, game-changing ultimate abilities. These phrases are not captioned, and there is no option to make them captioned. If you cannot hear an ultimate, you won't be able to avoid or stop it. But true disability inclusion can't just stop at functional barriers. As Amy Hamray says, disabled people are not just functionally limited in a vacuum, but affected by social barriers to their inclusion. In the context of Overwatch, this can be translated to feeling included among the larger player base and having teams willing to play with you. Because Overwatch is a team game, communication is important, especially when the action is continuous. Overwatch includes a small communication wheel, but it is very limited. The main mode of communication in Overwatch is through voice.
I'm with you, Diva. Let's go.
I'm going after Farah.
They're coming up top.
Teams will often demand that every player gets in voice chat in order to coordinate. This means that players who have verbal or audio disabilities are the severe disadvantage. Teams often are hostile to non-communicative players and those who speak with accents and lisps, and choose to lose the match on purpose rather than play with undesirable teammates. This doubly disadvantages disabled players as their rank will drop and they would be further seen as undesirable to play with. As Michael Berube reminds us, The disability rights slogan goes, "Nothing about us without us." It is not simply enough to represent disabled characters if Overwatch's design is one that overwhelmingly marginalizes disabled players. So while Overwatch may depict a future which accepts and perhaps celebrates disability and allows disabled people to be heroes, the game itself is not constructed of universal design principles at all. However, I hope that the diverse player base that its characters drew to the game both pushes Blizzard to create more accessible options in gameplay in the future, and encourages other companies to not just allow for, but center disabled players in future games. Hopefully this would also encourage future player bases to be more accepting of disabled players.